4. Bill draws dubious inferences from his claims. Bill infers that Paul must have believed in the empty tomb because he talked about Christ's appearances. Christ appeared, so the tomb must be empty. This is a highly problematic view. For ancient people, as opposed to post-Enlightenment thinkers like Bill, an appearance does not need to mean reanimation of the physical body. According to the Gospels, Moses and Elijah appeared to Peter, James, and John. Are we to believe that these men, Moses and Elijah, came back to life? That Moses' body was somehow reconstituted and raised from the dead, and that they appeared from heaven? Or was this a vision? Surely it was a vision. They disappear immediately. Ancient people had no trouble believing that bodies could be phantasmal, not physical. Evidence for this is found abundantly throughout all our ancient sources, Jewish, pagan, and Christian. Pagan sources from the 8th century Homer to the 2nd century Homeric hymns, from pagan myths to pagan novels, from pagan poets to pagan philosophers, they're all replete with accounts of gods appearing to humans in human form. But these are appearances, visions. They're not real human bodies. The pagan holy man, Apollonius of Tyana, appears to his followers after his death. But it's an appearance, a vision, not the reanimation of his body. Jewish texts are the same, where angels and archangels and demons and devils appear to people bodily, but they aren't real bodies. In short, Bill makes the mistake of assuming that if the disciples claimed to see Jesus alive afterwards, they necessarily believed or knew that this was his actual physical body. That's a modern assumption, not an ancient one. The texts we're dealing with are ancient texts, not modern ones. Ancient people had no difficulty at all thinking that a divine appearance was not an actual physical appearance. A body could be buried and the person could appear alive afterwards without the body leaving the tomb. If Bill doubts this, then I suggest he read some more ancient texts to see how they talk about the matter. He might start with the Christian texts of the 2nd century, such as the Acts of John, or the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, or the second treatise of the Great Seth, or he might consider the arguments used by Basilides, who allegedly was a disciple of the follower of Peter. For ancient people, post-death appearance was not the same as the reanimation of the body. Moreover, Jesus' body, after the resurrection, does things that bodies can't do. It walks into rooms that are behind locked doors. It ascends to heaven. Is Bill seriously going to argue on historical grounds that Jesus' resurrected body could do this? This is a theological claim about Jesus, not a historian's claim. Historians are unable to establish what God does. That's the work of the historian. So too with his concluding inference, that God raised Jesus from the dead. This is a theological conclusion. It's not a historical one. It's a statement about God. If he wants to mount mathematical evidence for what God probably did in the world, I have to say it's not going to be convincing to most mathematicians and certainly to most historians. Historians have no access to God. The historian can say that Jesus died on the cross, but he cannot say that God accepted his death as an atonement. The historian can say that the Apostle Paul claimed to have a vision of Jesus after his death. He cannot tell you that God raised him from the dead. The payoff is this. We don't know if Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. What we have are gospel stories written decades later by people who had heard stories in circulation, and it's not hard at all to imagine somebody coming up with a story. We don't know if his tomb was empty 3 days later. We don't know if he was physically seen by his followers afterwards. Bill's going to come up here and tell me now that I've contradicted myself, but I want to point out that earlier he praised me for changing my mind. I have 3 concluding questions for Bill. If Bill is claiming to be a historian, then I think it's important to evaluate his full relationship to the historical documents that he's appealing to. Does Bill think that the Gospels he relies upon for all his information have any mistakes in them at all? If so, could he tell us 2 or 3 of those mistakes? If not, how does he expect us to believe he's open to a historical evaluation of these sources? Based on his own previous assumptions, these texts have to be accurate. Second question. Bill believes that Jesus can historically be shown to have been involved with miracles, especially his resurrection, but also the miracles of his life, no doubt. I'd like him to discuss the evidence of other miracle workers from Jesus' day outside the Christian tradition. Is he willing to admit, on the same historical grounds, that these other people also did miracles? I'm referring to the traditions of miracles done by Apollonius of Tyana, Hanina Mendoza, Honi the Circle Drawer, Vespasian. Is Bill willing to acknowledge that Apollonius appeared to his followers after his death, or that Octavian ascended to heaven, or he can pick any other miracle worker from the pagan tradition he chooses? Third and finally, if the only miracles that Bill allows as having happened all belong to the Judeo-Christian tradition that he himself personally affirms, I'd like him to address the question of how that can be historically. How is it that the faith that he adopted as a teenager happens to be the only one that is historically credible? Is it just circumstance that he was born into a religious family or a religious culture that can historically be shown to be the only true religion?